Right, let's talk about types of staging. This kind of question will always crop up in the exam. You will always be asked at some point in section A to describe how you would stage something or what choice you might make in terms of staging types. There are 5 standard staging types that you need to be aware of, 4 of which are on this here poster, which has been in the drama studio for some time and will continue to be here. We've talked about them all before. You've used all of them as well, so let's get them right. Okay, first up, let's talk about the proscenium arch or end-on stage. This is the most typical kind of staging. It's the staging you will see in the majority, the overwhelming majority of traditional Victorian theatres, West End theatres. It's also the type of stage we have here at Roding Valley High School that most schools of this era have as well. The proscenium arch is literally the frame that runs around most traditional stages. And in some stages it's designed to look like a picture frame, okay, as if watching a piece of theatre is like looking at a moving painting. That is deliberate. So it's also called end-on, and if you used either of those terms in the exam, that would be fine, because the audience, here they are, the audience is literally at one end and the performance at the other end. Okay, there are some variations. Sometimes you do get a bit of an apron sticking out towards the audience, but generally speaking, the audience are on one side, the performance is on the other. Okay, so there are some advantages and disadvantages to this set, or this staging type. And there's some listed here. Let's go through these. In larger theatres, the audience can feel separated from the action. That is true, because there's almost a barrier. You're on one side, the actors are on the other side. It can be quite alienating. You feel separate, particularly in your standard traditional realism. When you get a murder mystery, for example, where the actors are behind the fourth wall, they don't break the fourth wall. It's not like watching TV, but it's as near as damning as it gets for theatre when it comes to realism and an end on stage. The scenery. Now, the note here on this poster says scenery can sometimes be difficult to organise. I'll be honest, I've got no idea what that means. What you can achieve on an end-on stage is you can create 3D sets or the illusions of 3 dimensions. You can have flats that go back across the stage that create wings. You can have backdrops that come in. You can create the illusion of depth because you've got backdrops that are painted to look smaller as if they're in the distance. So lots of flexibility in terms of the picture you create by putting things on the space. Okay. What disadvantage for the actors is that you have to think very hard about sight lines. It's really easy to mask another actor by standing in front of them. So when a director or an ensemble are making their blocking decisions really early on, they have to be aware of where the audience is. That's true of all spaces, but in particular, because you only have one point of view, effectively, they need to be wary of not standing in each other's way and masking each other. In terms of lighting, there's lots of flexibility. You can have lights effectively in the auditorium above the heads of the audience pointing at the stage. You can have lights that are flown above the stage. Lighting either side of the stage, lighting on from either angle. Lots of flexibility in terms of lighting, creating depth, creating shadows, things like that. Okay, so that's your end-on or proscenium arch stage. It is appropriate to use the shorter term pros arch as well, P-R-O-S, but if you're going to do that, use the word proscenium at least once first in an answer. Traverse. Okay, traverse is where you have audience on 2 sides. Here's the audience here on one side, and there's the audience on the other side. Traverse is a French word to mean to go across, I think. So to traverse something, you're walking across it. So that's what the actors do. Okay, they can go back and forth on one side of the stage and the other, walking around. So in terms of key points here, it says here, actors should not keep their back to the same section of the audience for too long. So when you're doing traverse, which is also true of theatre in the round as well, you have audience on both sides. You can't just act in one direction. You have to keep moving it around in an appropriate way. Okay. It says also here, items of the set in the central area need to be low level to avoid obstructing sight lines. Well, yes, you put something in the middle. You can't put a flat in the middle. You can't put a big block that's going to be in any way near or taller than an actor, because it's going to mask some actors over here from these audience members over here. Obviously, what you can do is put set either end. That's possible because it doesn't obstruct sight lines for the majority of the audience. Low-level things are possible. You can have raised blocks or rostra here. We have more rostrum blocks over here. So a singular would be a rostrum block, but there are two here, so there are two rostra. And these, we don't call these stairs or steps. These are treads. And they allow the actors access to the top of the rostra at either end. Okay, so yes, you can have scenery either end as well. So you can't have flats in the middle, but you can have lots either end, entrances and exits through here. You might have an entrance and exit through the audience perhaps, but usually it's from either end. So it's traverse. Okay, and one of the best examples of traverse staging I've ever seen was where I saw the railway children at an actual station. The stage was effectively the platform. There were two platforms, and running down the centre of those two platforms was a railway line, because it was actually Waterloo Station. Audience were on either side of those two platforms, and they drove an actual steam train down the centre of the space on two key occasions in that story about the railway children. Okay. In terms of lighting, it's still very flexible. The lighting is going to be flown above for the most part. You aren't going to have lights coming across in this direction towards the stage, because any lighting above the heads of these audience members is going to be effectively shining in the faces of these audience members over here. So here we have, we've done that one. Right. Thrust or arena staging. Very popular in modern theatres, it says. Yes, that is true. The Olivier stage at the National is effectively a thrust stage. Greek amphitheatres are effectively thrust stages because the performance arena, or in that particular case, the orchestra, juts out into the audience. The way to remember a thrust stage is that the acting space literally thrusts out, sticks out into the audience. Probably the most famous thrust stage in London is the Globe Theatre, where audience can stand, the groundlings can stand on three sides of that stage. Okay. Tabs, let's not call them curtains, tabs are often used. Here are the tabs. Look, on an end on stage, there are these curtains that in the industry are called tabs. They can be flown in or dropped in or pulled across the front of the stage to block off the stage from the audience. That's possible in this sort of staging, but uncommon. Even less common on a thrust stage. I have seen it done where you've got a tab track where the tabs come round the performance space. So I have seen that done, but it is unusual. So more often than not, you don't get tabs, which is the correct word for theatre curtains. You don't get tabs on a thrust stage. We don't use the word curtains to describe them because if you have, here we have a set on our end-on stage, and on this set we have some curtains that are drawn across this entrance. If you dress a set, you've got some windows on a set, and there's some curtains on that set, that's set dressing. They are curtains. These are tabs. So, okay, back to our thrust stage. So no tabs to separate the action from the audience. Set changes can be tricky. You can't do things, a set change on a pros arch stage is dead easy. If you want to hide it, if you're that kind doing that sort of realism, you can drop the tabs in or have a blackout. The set can move on and off quite quickly. But with this, your technicians actually have to be coming out towards the audience and getting onto the stage to move stuff around. But of course, the advantage is it's way more intimate. So the traverse stage and the thrust stage actually get the actors out into the audience a bit more. The Swan Theatre, which is a Shakespearean theatre at Stratford, sticks out to the audience even more than the Globe does, and that makes it a lot more intimate. You'll notice that the entrance points for a thrust stage can be from the back, can be upstage. There is an upstage. It's difficult to talk about upstage and downstage when it comes to traverse and theatre in the round. There is an upstage and downstage and stage right and stage left in a thrust stage. That makes more sense. Actors can also enter through the audience. This is certainly true of the Swan Theatre and the Globe as well. They often enter through the audience. They might build the thrust out and add an extra section, sort of catwalk-like style thrust. So there's lots of flexibility there. Okay, and our final one is Theatre in the Round. Okay, which if you've ever been to a circus, you have experienced. And Theatre in the Round literally puts the audience all the way around the action. So in our pros arch stage, actors are acting generally in one direction. You know where your audience is. In the traverse, your audience on two sides. Thrust, audience on three sides. So it's very easy to have your back turned to the audience. So just need to be aware of that. And Theatre in the Round, audience all the way around you. So when it comes to performing, it's not a case of thinking, right, I need to keep turning around and spinning around. It's just being aware that you have audience all the way around you, sending your performance in as many directions as possible, that's reasonable. But also, if you're part of an ensemble, if you've got your back to the audience, the actor facing you has got his back or her back to the other part of the audience, but you're both facing a different direction. So the experience the audience gets is just different depending on where they're sat, I guess. Scenery in Audience in the Round is a very tricky thing to do. In much the same way as you can't have a great big piece of scenery in the middle of a traverse stage, that's true all the way around Theatre in the Round. There is no end you could put something on. This is also true of the thrust, where you can have scenery, but it has to be towards the back. It has to be upstage. With this, I guess if you were going to put any scenery anywhere, it would have to be behind the audience, just to give an idea of location. You might use projections, perhaps, to project images behind the audience. But for the most part, set scenery needs to be low level. You can see on this idea of Theatre in the Round, there is a bit of set there, but it's low level blocks, it's rostra, it's a raised platform. It's not going to block any sight lines from anyone, irrespective of where they sit. Okay, whereas the thrust stage was pretty intimate, allowed greater intimacy, Theatre in the Round is the second most intimate staging type, because you are surrounded by the audience. It's a lot more communal. There's almost no divide between you and the audience, depending on your performance style. Okay, there is one staging type which is missing from these four on the poster, and that is promenade. And promenade, another French word, it just means walking about. To promenade in French is to have a walk. So in a promenade staging, the actors might mingle with the audience might move from one place to the next. You may have heard of the proms, which are the classical concerts that happen every year at the Albert Hall. They're called that because the majority of the audience are stood up and can move around freely. So you can have promenade performance with each of these four staging types to an extent. The proms, those classical concerts, are effectively an end-on performance where the audience gets to mill around. Of course, if you get to the point of the audience can mill around and move in between performances, between actors, move from location to location, you're then moving into various kinds of immersive theatre. So the theatre of the company Yumi Bum Bum Train, for example, which had audience members that they called passengers rather than audience, that would move from room to room and location to location. This is also true to an extent of performance styles like escape rooms are effectively forms of immersive theatre, especially if there are actors involved in working with you. Companies like Punch Drunk, who create environments that audiences walk through and interact with. So that's the third staging type, that is promenade theatre. Okay, so we had proscenium arch or end on, audience on one side. Traverse, audience on two sides. There it is. Thrust, audience on three sides. Theatre in the round, audience on four sides, or circling the action. And then not proscenium arch, that's that one. Promenade, the promenade style of theatre where the audience are on their feet and or are mobile, can move around at will or move from location to location in the course of the performance. And those are the types of staging.